I mentioned earlier that I was in Delaware last night, pinch hitting for Candace Owens at her speech she was supposed to give, because Candace flew to Paris to open a fashion show with Kanye West, which is the sort of thing that Candace does. And so I didn't hear any more details than this, other than I get a call, Candace is on the tarmac, she says, okay, this is what's happening, and that's it, okay? Then I tune in, I wait for the international trending news, and I see it. The shirt that Candace and Kanye wore is a shirt, you can see the photo from the back, it says, White Lives Matter. Candace there with a white shirt and black print, White Lives Matter. Kanye there, black shirt, white print, White Lives Matter. I love it. I absolutely love it. They're getting some pushback. Obviously, they're getting pushback from the libs because the libs want to say Black Lives Matter. And they're getting some pushback from the people in the middle because they say, oh, you shouldn't say Black Lives Matter or White Lives Matter. You should just say all lives matter. But Kanye and Candace get it. Okay, they get it. Obviously, they're being intentionally provocative. It's a fashion show. That's what you do at fashion shows. But they get the point here. Why would you say white lives matter? Well, from a racial standpoint, as long as we're talking about black lives or all lives or white lives, from a racial standpoint, what they're saying is, I think, I don't want to speak for Candace, but this is just my interpretation of the shirt. Right now, we have been told for years that black people are marginalized and discriminated against and insulted and pushed to the margins of society, and that's why we need to say Black Lives Matter. But that's not true. Actually, there is no legal discrimination or systemic discrimination or really discrimination at all, certainly not at a large scale, against black people. In fact, there's discrimination in favor of black people through things like affirmative action, through certain applications of the civil rights laws, through the culture, certainly, through the popular media. The only group that you are actually both legally allowed to discriminate against and culturally encouraged to discriminate against and insult and mock and push to the fringes of society. The only racial group is white people. That's what happens. It's the only group you're allowed to make fun of on TV. It's the only group. White people and Asians you're allowed to discriminate against in college admissions. And so I don't know, it's unfortunate for the Asians that they got lumped in with the white people. But that's in jobs, in employment, in all sorts of things. It's the white people. And so Kanye and Candace are coming out there and provocatively saying, putting racial issues aside, they're saying, as they frequently have, the narrative that you are being fed by the liberal establishment is not only false, it's the opposite of true. They're actually presenting a vision of reality. The LeBron James, black men can't walk out their doors without being hunted down by racist cops. It's just completely made up. The only people who are being hunted down by the government right now because of their identity are white conservatives. They're like Midwestern grannies who have the audacity to raise some questions about the 2020 election, okay? Or pro-life activists on the sidewalk. Or parents of all races who don't want their kids to be taught CRT and transgenderism in schools. Okay, but then it's even more interesting with the Kanye shirt, because you couldn't see it in the picture, but on the front of the Kanye shirt is a picture of John Paul II. And it says, "We will follow your example." John Paul II. So, what? White Lives Matter on the back, John Paul II on the front. And then it hit me, again, maybe I'm reading too deeply into it, but it hit me at a higher level than just this kind of silly talk about race. Is the point that Kanye is making a little deeper than that? Because the Pope wears white. John Paul II wore white. Benedict wore white. Francis wears white. The Pope wears white. A white zucchetto, a white mozzetta, a white cassock, that's the symbol of the Pope. And is he suggesting something a little deeper here? That when we're talking about white lives matter, we're not just talking about race. We're talking about something deeper. We're talking about a symbol, not of a particular racial group, but of purity, a symbol of the soul after baptism, and a symbol of a soul wearing a sort of white garment, these images that we see in paradise. We know that Kanye has had a conversion or reversion sort of experience to Christianity. We know he talks about religious themes a lot. We know he has an album called Jesus is King. Is there maybe a suggestion here on this provocative shirt that actually, Not only is the BLM narrative bogus, we're going to debunk and own that with facts and logic and provocation, but the whole racial narrative is kind of a distraction from what we should really be talking about, which is deeper, not just cultural, but actually ultimately religious, because ultimately all human conflict is theological. That's my read on it. Again, I don't know. I don't know that that's what was going through Kanye's head. I actually don't really care. Very often, the greatest artists are not critics of their own work. Very often, the greatest artists don't even consciously know what they are doing. And this has been written about going all the way back to ancient Greece. The idea that the artists are just sort of receiving inspiration from the muses, and then they're just doing stuff. And the reason there's a difference between artists and critics is because very often the artists couldn't even articulate exactly what they're doing. They're producing the art, and it's up to the critics to interpret that sort of art. Right now, head on over to expressvpn.com/MichaelYT. Let me ask you something. What if there were someone out there who kept a log of every single thing you did every minute of the day? I think that would be pretty creepy. Well, what if I told you that's exactly what happens every time you go online? Your internet provider, AT&T, Comcast, whoever, is allowed to store logs of every website you've ever visited and can legally sell those data to anyone. That is why I trust ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN reroutes your internet connection through their secure servers so your internet provider can't see or log what you do online. Now, many of you might be wondering, well, if I'm routing all my data through a VPN, then doesn't that just mean the VPN can see what I'm doing and log my data instead? You're right to worry about that, except while many VPNs have a no logs policy, and they claim to have a no logs policy, many have been caught logging customer activity. ExpressVPN is the only VPN that I trust because they use trusted server technology. They were the first major VPN provider to engineer all of their VPN servers to run in RAM. This makes it impossible for their VPN servers to store any data, including logs of any ExpressVPN customers. Stop letting people keep logs on what you do online. Head on over right now to expressvpn.com/MichaelYT. Find out how you can get 3 months free. Speaking of lives mattering, speaking of a popular disregard for human life, new details are emerging. I mentioned this a few days ago, maybe last week, this shooting of the 84-year-old pro-life lady in Michigan, this retired nurse, Joan Jacobson, and shot by this crazy man, a 74-year-old guy named Richard Harvey, who says he fired off a warning shot from his .22 caliber rifle when he heard his wife arguing with this pro-life canvasser lady. And then he says he tried to push away Jacobson's clipboard and said he accidentally shot her in the front of her shoulder. Accidentally. Fires a warning shot. He knows the gun is loaded. He's brandishing his gun and pushing this 84-year-old lady away and shoots her in the shoulder. And she says, I do think that he knew what he was doing. She says, I think it was intentional. This woman is 120 pounds and 5 feet tall. She says she didn't refuse to leave their property when they asked. She says she didn't threaten anybody or anything like that. Certainly, though, there is no reason to be brandishing a gun at an 84-year-old woman who's 5 feet tall, ever. Even if she's coming at you with a hammer, okay, there's no reason to have a gun, certainly not a loaded gun, and to shoot her. So why do I bring this up? Because you want to make sure you're getting the full story here. We still don't really know the full story. But what we do know is, as the full story is coming out, it is continuing to look terrible for this guy. And the way you know this, by the way, is that the left-wing media are not covering the story. If the story really were, this awful woman was threatening them, and you'd be hearing about it from the media. But you're seeing the media cover up this story. And so as the details come out, yeah, maybe there's some complication here. Maybe the pro-life lady was arguing with the woman. No, I'm not even sure that that's the case. But as the details come out, we continue to look right. Okay, right and right and right and right. And I do think people are starting to notice that. Whether they can take that noticing and take that desire and channel it into better government, that remains to be seen. The rest of the show is continuing now. You do not want to miss it. If you are not a member, click the link in the description and join us. We have a great interview coming up. It's with Michael Shellenberger. Michael Shellenberger is a really, really important voice on environmental issues. And Michael Shellenberger is shedding some light on what I think are not only the ludicrous but downright offensive Democrat claims about Hurricane Ian and all the destruction down in Florida, which they blame on global warming and those mean old conservatives who don't want to recycle or whatever, drive Teslas. And Schellenberger brings a little bit of science to that. So we will get to him in just 1 second. See you over at the member block.